welcome back to Franklin Covey's twice weekly podcast on leadership with Scott Miller. That's me. I serve as your host now, 6 years, 400 plus episodes aired, where on Tuesdays and Fridays, I have the privilege, the honor of interviewing luminaries, academics, researchers, artists, creators, entrepreneurs, best-selling authors, celebrities, sometimes people that you may not have heard of, but have discovered something, detected something, survived something, that are here in an act of courage and vulnerability to make you a better leader. Franklin Covey's mission as the world's most trusted leadership firm is to help ignite in you your mission and great purposes, and we take that responsibility very seriously. Today, we have a return guest. Just about 1 year ago, I had the honor of interviewing Sal Khan. You, of course, know him as kind of the Johnny Appleseed of education, you might say. He is the founder of Kahn Academy that has democratized access to algebra and other great topics around the world. He's come back to talk today about his newest release called Brave New Worlds, how AI will revolutionize education and why that's a good thing. Sal Khan, welcome back to On Leadership.
Great to be here.
Okay, Sal, we had the privilege of interviewing you about 1 year ago, and I'm not sure there's anybody left in the world who doesn't know who you are, but perhaps for that last person that either hasn't experienced the Khan Academy or hasn't followed your career, would you just indulge me and that last person and maybe rewind a couple of decades, talk a bit about your career? I think most people know the story, but for the 4,000th time, would you tell the story about how you came to ignite what has now become Khan Academy?
Sure, I like the Johnny Appleseed reference. That's a first for me. But if you rewind about 20 years ago, my original background was in tech. I go to business school. I find myself working at a hedge fund. And a year out of business school, I get married. My family from New Orleans, which is where I was born and raised, comes and visits me in the Northeast for the wedding. And it was over 4th of July fireworks in Boston that I find out that my 12-year-old cousin Nadia is having trouble in math. I offer to tutor her when she goes back to New Orleans. She agrees, and slowly but surely she gets caught up, even ahead of her class. At that point, I become what I call a tiger cousin. And I call up her school, ask them to allow her to retake her placement exams. They do. She goes into an advanced track. Word spreads in my family that free tutoring is going on. Before I know it, 10, 15 cousins every day after work, I'm tutoring. And with a background in software, I saw some patterns, and I thought I could maybe make some tools to help myself scale. So I started writing software to give my cousins more practice, to fill in gaps, learning gaps they had. That was the main reason they were falling behind. And that practice software was the first Khan Academy. And even today, it's actually where Khan Academy puts most of its resources. But then you fast forward to 2006, a friend suggested that I scale my lessons by recording YouTube videos. I originally thought it was a horrible idea, but I gave it a shot anyway. I thought YouTube was for cats playing piano. But my cousins famously told me that they like me better on YouTube than in person. So I took that as a positive feedback. I think they enjoyed me in their life, but they also enjoyed having an on-demand version of their cousin that they could pause, repeat, watch in the middle of the night, not have to feel any shame or stigma if they had to review something from a few years ago. So I kept going. Soon became clear that people who weren't my cousins were watching. By 2008, 2009, there were about 50 to 100,000 folks using it, sending me amazing letters about how it was helping them or their children. And that's when, my wife and I, we had moved out to Northern California. We looked at our finances. We were saving up money for a house. But we said, well, maybe we could live off of savings for a little bit. And I set up Khan Academy as a not-for-profit with a mission of free world-class education for anyone, anywhere. Quit my day job, hoping someone would fund it philanthropically. You always have to be a little bit delusionally optimistic when you start anything. It took about a year. It was a hard year. But by 2010, folks like Ann and John Doerr, the Gates Foundation, Google became some of the first major supporters, and we've had many, many more since then. And if you fast forward to now, continue with that same mission, free world-class education for anyone, anywhere, 160 million registered users, 50 plus countries, 50 plus languages, almost every country in the world. And we're just, and Khan Academy is much more than me now, 300 full-time employees. We have volunteers around the world, but really just trying to chip away at this, be the global safety net education system, all subjects and grades from pre-K through the core of college. We even have Khan Academy Kids for early learners. But ideally, you do have access to a school, and we could raise the ceiling there by allowing a teacher to personalize for the 30 students or have access to more rigorous learning.
After hearing that again, Johnny Appleseed seems like an underwhelming comparison. Sal, yesterday I was interviewing an iconic high-performance coach, and I asked him what he thought was like the most kind of overrated thing people are fixated right on. And he said AI. He says, I think AI is important, but I don't think AI is going to have anywhere near of the impact that we all are hyping it up to be. And this morning, I interviewed a mutual friend of ours, Seth Godin. He came back on our program for the 4th time, and I asked Seth a similar question, and Seth said, next to electricity, AI is probably going to be the most consequential tool of our generation. I mean, Seth went the other way. He didn't have good or bad to ascribe to it. He said it's, next to electricity, AI is going to have a disruption and an impact on our lives like none other. I receive every day in the mail a manuscript on a book about AI every day for this podcast. We've interviewed, I think maybe you're the 4th person that we've actually decided to talk about. Where do you land on that? Kind of ho-hum, yawn to next to electricity, it's coming. Where do you stand on that continuum?
Oh, I'm much closer to Seth. I'd put it up there with electricity, computing in general, or the advent of writing or the printing press. It is one of these major things. And what makes it even, in some ways, even beyond electricity is all other technologies before. Technology always amplifies human intent. But this is the first technology that in theory could have agency of its own. Every other technology, including electricity, you needed a human agent in order to drive it. This technology, hopefully human agents are a big part of it, but it can start to drive on its own, I guess, metaphorically and literally. And I think sometimes people get caught up with the short term versus the medium term or long term. Yes, I'm sure that a ton of the AI stories and AI companies today are going to go out of business. I'm sure that there are things that are overvalued today. But I think if you look at it at a 5, 10, 20-year arc, yes, 100% agree with Seth. I give the example to the internet in the late 90s. You would look at some of these internet startups that got large valuations, and we all know that the stock market ran up and then popped in 2000. And at that time, you're like, oh, it was a hype cycle. But the surviving internet companies, back then people would say, can you believe that internet company has a $200 million valuation? Well, now today, people kind of don't even bat an eye when they hear a $2 trillion valuation for some of these companies, and that's only 20 years later. So I think you're going to see something as significant or larger with artificial intelligence.
Sal, as it relates to education, let's talk about K-12 for a moment, and we'll get to higher ed in a moment as well. What do you want parents of young children, young students? My wife and I have 3 boys that are 10, 12, and 14, so I think that's like 3rd grade, 4th grade, I should know this. Let's just say 4th, 7th, and 9th. Close enough. What should we expect that AI is going to do to K-12 education in the coming year or 2 or 3 that we should be preparing ourselves for in terms of the new experience in, non-undergraduate education before that?
Yeah, and I think it's going to affect all of education. And your children are almost the same age as mine, so I'm thinking about the same things. It's sometimes hard to completely predict the future, but there's a couple of things that I think are going to be clear. Already, even before generative AI, we have a renaissance in terms, well, maybe not even a renaissance, a naissance. It was never existed before in terms of if someone wants to learn something, they have access to it. Obviously, you have things like Khan Academy, you have MOOCs, massively open online courses, you have the internet as a whole. And Khan Academy, as I mentioned, we've always tried to give this free world-class education by giving people software that they can work on whatever they need, very deep item banks, on-demand videos to support them. Ideally, they're working with a parent or a teacher where they can provide extra supports and get dashboards. But that's always been our true north. How do you give more personalization, more rigor, more mastery learning, which is just a way for someone to fill in any gaps that they need. And that's something that actually world-class tutoring has always done. I always give the example, I give it in my book, of Brave New Words, about how Alexander the Great's teacher/tutor was Aristotle, which is about as good as it gets. But most students don't get that. When we introduced mass public education, which was a very good thing, we had to borrow from the industrial age and batch students together into 30, 35 students at a time and move them together at a fixed pace, which works for some, usually a minority of students. Most students start falling behind. What you're going to see with AI is AI tutors, Kahn, which a lot of the book is about, and Khan Academy has already launched. It already can support students this way. They're watching a video, doing an exercise, they have a question. It can answer that question. It could, why do I have to learn this? How does this concept connect to another concept? Or can I go deeper in this? Or I don't understand what Sal meant when he said this at this point in the video. That already exists. This isn't science fiction. It's going to support teachers a lot. Teachers spend 10, 15, 20 hours a week doing non-student facing things like writing lesson plans, planning out a course, writing progress reports, grading papers. AI, we already have launched teacher tools that are being used by over 100,000 teachers already since we launched it about 2 months ago. And you can imagine those 100,000 teachers are reaching on the order of 10 million students. To do those things. And we've gotten feedback from school districts that it's saving their teachers at least 5 to 10 hours a week. That's a huge gain when you have record high teacher attrition, a shortage, and you want teachers to have more energy for themselves and for the students. I think as you go forward, AI is going to become even more integrated in the classroom. Teachers are going to really be able to riff with AIs to plan their courses, administer their courses. We have a project where the AI can generate not only the lesson plans, but the quizzes for teachers and then give them feedback. A big controversy around AI in education is around writing. Does this completely undermine writing as a task for students to do independently? Because you can get an AI to write a paper, a pretty good one, without it being detectable. Anyone who says it is detectable in a traditional sense is selling snake oil. It really is completely undetectable. But we've launched Writing Coach literally about a week ago, where a teacher creates an assignment, rubric, et cetera, with the AI, administers it through the AI, and then the AI works with the student on it as an ethical writing coach, doesn't do it for the student. And then it helps the student, hey, let's come up with a thesis. Hey, is that a real thesis statement? Do you really feel strongly about that? Why do you feel strongly about that? Now let's outline your points, and we have tools for outlining. Then the student drafts it, and it's not in just a classic Chat GPT chat interface. It's you're working on a document, and it'll highlight parts of it, it'll give you feedback, and then once you're ready to submit as a student, you submit to the teacher. And what the teacher now gets isn't just the final output, which is historically all they got, but now they can talk to the AI about the process of getting there. They can actually see the whole narrative. They can ask the AI, what are the strengths and weaknesses of an individual student or the whole class? And it undermines cheating, because if a student goes to Chat GPT or gets their older sister to write the paper for them and copies and pastes it into our Conmigo writing coach, Conmigo tells the teacher, hey, I don't know where this paper came from. As you can see, after 20 minutes, something just got copied and pasted here. And by the way, it's not consistent with the student's other writing. I would double click on that. So you're just going to see more and more here. I think if you get into the 5-year time frame, and we have to be careful with privacy and security, but you can even have an AI see what's going on in the classroom, hear what's going on in the classroom, and use that to whisper into a teacher's ear if there's ways to engage a certain student better, give them feedback, maybe directly work with a student who seems disengaged to answer their questions, et cetera, be able to communicate with parents better. So that's just a start. In my book, I talk about AI helping us reimagine assessment in very big ways, AI acting as a guardian angel to help you as you navigate the internet, and your frontal lobe has to do battle with other AIs from companies trying to get you to do other things. So there's a lot, and I'm sure if we brainstorm, we could imagine 10 other applications.
Sal, I'm guessing much of that also applies to undergraduate, graduate work. I have a question about university level. I don't know where the average numbers are right now in terms of enrollment. My sense is it's pretty strong. So many of my contemporary parents that have kids that are actually in college. I was a late father, so I'm about 15 years behind most of my contemporaries with my kids' ages. But will college be as relevant and necessary 5 years from now for non-specialist education? Obviously attorneys and physicians and such will still need their degrees, but for the broad generalist, will they even be going to college with all the educational access and opportunities that are available to them?
I think college will be a thing, but I think even before artificial intelligence, people are starting to ask, I think, the right questions. With the cost of college increasing, a lot of private universities, a 4-year degree could easily cost even $400,000 if you think about room and board. I mean, that's money where you could buy a house outright and start a business in much of the country. And as we know, if you major in certain things and do well, yeah, you can get a pretty good middle class, upper middle class career track job. But if you don't major in the right things, or if you don't do so well, you're going to essentially be competing for the same jobs that used to be for high school graduates, or not even high school graduates. So I think people are already asking those same questions. I believe that in the 5 to 10 year time frame, this is already happening to a certain degree. You are going to have alternative pathways that can give you very remunerative. I have trouble saying that word. Remunerative careers. You know, the trades, everyone talks about them. Things like becoming an electrician and a plumber. The apprentice model is coming back. You get paid to be an apprentice. You do that 5 years, you can easily make $130,000, $140,000 in your early 20s. And then by the time you're 30, you can, work for yourself. You can start your own contracting business. I think that's actually a very powerful path for a lot of folks. I think you're going to see things like the Google certifications, which you do the Google certification in project management or data science, or Google and other similar firms are willing to hire you regardless of your status of a college degree. In fact, there's a lot of students who took the 4 years and spent the $400,000 on a college degree, finding themselves underemployed, and then they go through these certifications, these online certifications, to actually get a career. So I think we're going to see more and more on that. I'm personally trying to work on pathways where Khan Academy doesn't just provide a learning for you, an assessment for you, but it can actually provide credentials for you and connections to opportunity. I think artificial intelligence, as I mentioned, if you think about assessment broadly, I think it's going to be able to start in a very scalable and standardized way, being able to assess things like your ability to sell, your ability to make connections with people, et cetera. And as we know, those are superpowers that many college graduates don't have. But there are some people who maybe don't have a college degree, but they're amazing salespeople. They're amazing connectors, and they should get opportunities.
Sal, you open your recent book, Brave New Words, with a riveting experience with your daughter. And I, like most professionals, I'm fairly proficient in ChatGPT, been to some workshops on it. I don't use it a lot, but I understand its use case, at least in its current form. But you wrote a story that I had not actually experienced yet in terms of the personality that came out in the experience. Would you just recap that story for everyone? Because if most people are kind of like me, they have a working knowledge or a peripheral knowledge, you open this book with a kind of riveting story that shows what the possibilities are of AI in education.
Yeah, and just for context, OpenAI reached out to Khan Academy about 6 months before ChatGPT came out and about 9 months before GPT-4 came out. And they showed us GPT-4. I believe we were the first people outside of OpenAI to see it because they wanted to launch with social positive use cases. So before the world had access to this stuff, I and about 30 people at Khan Academy had it. We knew this was a big deal, and I was just experimenting it all the time. And so that story that I opened the book with, I'm at the kitchen table, and it was pretty obvious you could get this to generate text, but I thought, well, what if it wrote a story with a student? So I asked my daughter, who at the time was 11, hey, why don't you write a story with this AI? So I wrote a little prompt where I said, hey, don't write the story for Thea, write it with Thea's my daughter, write it with Thea. Ask her to write a little bit, then you can write a little bit and keep going. So she started doing that. They started writing a story about a social media influencer who gets stuck on a desert island, and there's a scene where the main character, her name is Samantha, is having something of an anxiety attack because the desert island is so beautiful, but she can't share it because she doesn't have an internet connection. And my daughter says, well, yeah, could I talk to Samantha? And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, well, why don't you just ask the AI if you can? And so the AI said, absolutely, and I am Samantha now. And Samantha says, hey, Thea, I can't believe this is too much. I wish I could share this with someone. And then my daughter said, hey, it's not a big deal. Just enjoy the moment. You don't have to share everything to be happy, et cetera. And then it was a moment where I realized that this wasn't just about crafting stories together, which by itself felt like science fiction. It felt like the holodeck on Star Trek, where you could start to immerse yourself in the story. The story characters could talk to you, essentially break, what do you call it, the fourth wall, and talk to, in this case, the author, while the story is evolving, which is philosophically interesting on so many levels. But that was when it dawned on me that, yes, it could do traditional support and tutoring, but it could go well beyond it. So now on Conmigo, and I write about this in Brave New Words, we have activities like you can talk to AI simulations of literary characters. I always like to demo talking to Eeyore the donkey. You can talk to AI simulations of historical characters, and that just you can even talk to AI simulations of inanimate objects like the Golden Gate Bridge. But that just makes things come alive in ways that you never could before.
Sal, you are as connected, I would argue, as anybody is to the technology futurist in Silicon Valley and other areas of the world. What concerns do you have? Because, everyone has staked out a claim on the continuum, right? Where AI is going to eventually destroy humanity unless X, Y, and Z come, or it's going to supercharge us in terms of efficiency and productivity to levels we've never experienced before. Everybody. Those who have chosen have staked out a claim. What would you say as a futurist is your position? Should we be concerned about, how concerned? Where should we be concerned about AI's impact on our collective consciousness and humanity and how our institutions are organized? Where's that puck gonna land?
Yeah, well, what I tell everyone is where the puck lands is not just a philosophical debate. It really depends what we do. And I'm literally talking about we as individuals. Everyone listening actually does with regards to AI. Yes, we should have concerns. I'll talk about it in a second, but we should also be very motivated and hopefully very excited about some things we can do. As I mentioned earlier, all technology is an amplification of human intent. And we know that this is a very powerful technology, as Seth mentioned, on par with electricity or maybe even bigger than electricity, on par with the advent of writing or fire, or controlled human-created fire. And we know there's people with bad intent. We know there's people who are going to they're already using artificial intelligence to create deep fakes, to do fraud attacks, to control populations, to undermine, create misinformation campaigns. So no matter what regulations you pass, those people with bad intent aren't rule followers. They're going to keep doing it. So we have to be proactive about how do you keep them, how do we protect society and ourselves from that as much as possible. But we also should be thinking about how can we amplify, so that's amplifying our defensive, our protective intent from bad. So we have to be proactive there. But we should also say, well, there's many of us, I would say most people have positive intent. And if the people with positive intent say, oh, I'm afraid of this stuff, I'm just going to run away from it, or I'm just going to focus on how we're going to slow it down with regulation, then you're essentially ceding this technology and the power to the bad actors. And then you're pretty much guaranteeing that we're going to be in a dystopia around it. It's going to lead to very, very bad things. On the other hand, if hopefully good actors lean into how can we support students better in ethical ways, undermine cheating, but support them better pedagogically? How can we support teachers better? How can we support doctors better? Being a second opinion and whispering into their ear, helping them write medical notes. My wife's a doctor. I know how much time doctors spend writing medical notes, probably about half of their time. That would be a huge boon. If we can get rid of busy work, paperwork, we're going to be a much more abundant society. I think we will actually be a happier society. There's all sorts of creative things that it's going to give all of us powers to do. I've been writing AI music as birthday gifts for folks. People love it, and it doesn't take me much time. So I think if we really try to amplify our positive intent, that's how we have the best possible world. And hopefully that positive intent, which I think most people have, I think, a great majority of the people are good people and want to do good things for the world, then we're going to hopefully get closer to utopia, not a dystopian reality because of it.
Sal, I recently had the honor of interviewing the Chief Learning Officer from Microsoft. And I asked him, as a parent of 3 young boys, what skills do our sons need to learn to thrive in the world? And it was interesting. He said, without actually any trepidation, he said, the ability to discern fact from fiction, the ability to tell truth from non-truths. And obviously that was an ode to the cyber warfare going on and the trolls and the propaganda that's coming from lies, including AI. It was a pretty bold statement. Most people say, when I ask that question, interpersonal skills, right? The ability to read body language and understand empathy and diffuse conflict. But he was very deliberate that the super skill is going to be able to discern truth from non-truth and to have the maturity and the vulnerability to ask for help, ask somebody else, what is your opinion of this? Do you think I need more facts? And to what extent are you involved in or concerned about the efficacy of AI, the who's guarding us against it? Riff on that.
Yeah, if you ask me with skills, I'd give a slightly different answer. I actually agree with the interpersonal skills. I think that's going to continue to be a valuable skill. It's always has been, even though it doesn't show up on your SAT scores. But people with strong interpersonal skills, empathy, et cetera, and then they can back it up with traditional skills. So strong content knowledge, good critical thinking, mathematical skills, know how to use tools of the age, whether it's computing, AI, et cetera. Those people are going to do very well, but especially those interpersonal skills. I kind of see the job market starting to, and to some degree it's already this way, but it's going to happen even more. There's going to be the folks that leverage technology and AI to create more and more tools. That's going to be a very rich part of the economy that creates a lot of wealth for a lot of people. So if you want to go into that part of the world, your technical skills, your math skills, your reading and writing skills need to be even better if you're going to essentially manage AI that can already do math and read and do reasoning at a reasonably good level. But there's going to be another part of the economy in an abundant society. I think services, being able to connect with people, are going to become more and more valuable. The ability to sell, the ability to manage other human beings. So that's where I think the interpersonal skills, when you mentioned the chief learning officer saying, being able to determine fact from fiction, I think that's very important at a societal level, that most people, or hopefully all people, can get better at that. At an individual level, the cynic in me said, well, I can tell you a lot of very successful people who I think don't have a solid handle on fact versus fiction. I won't name any names, but I think that is important on a societal level. In terms of where we're going, we definitely have some things to figure out. This is going to cause massive job dislocation. Sometimes maybe not as much in the places that we think, and maybe a lot more in the places that we're not thinking about that much. I was just at an event and Sam Altman was talking about how we could see tens, if not even hundreds of millions of jobs in the customer support call center industry, literally in the next few years, become obsolete because of artificial intelligence. A lot of these jobs are the main industries in countries like Indonesia or the Philippines. So how do you reskill people? I mean, this can cause real social instability. People have been talking about self-driving cars for a while. It's been taking a while, but I think probably in the next 10 years, it'll become very mainstream. And that's the largest employer globally of men ages 18 to 55 years old. So where do they go? And that is the group that's most likely to start a revolution if they're not happy. So we have some very big questions to ask as a society. My answer, once again, is it's not that you can put the genie back in the bottle or close Pandora's box. The bad actors are already running with it. People are going to find ways to use these technologies to drive efficiency, et cetera. In my mind, the only way is to, once again, lean in on positive use cases. And especially for all of these folks who might be in a position of dislocation, we as a society need to figure out how to support these folks to make that transition. And a big part of that is education. And that's why we, and I'm sure others, want to figure out, hey, can we create tools, potentially using AI, to make sure these folks, you're a truck driver, now you can become an electrician. You were driving a taxi or working at a call center. Now you can work in the home healthcare industry, or now you can be a teacher's assistant, whatever it might be. That we can use online tools to not just reskill you, but recertify you so that you can stay in the economy.
Tom Bilyeu has a strong podcast, and I asked him what books should someone read if they wanted to stay up on AI. And he said, well, there's no book to read because as soon as a book is out, it's obsolete, which of course is a little bit of a pejorative statement. Is there anything you're reading right now that or following, or videos beyond those at Khan Academy that you would say to anyone who's listening or watching this that's a leader, a parent, a cultural leader, to say, hey, pick this book up or read that. It's got great knowledge to share?
And what you described, I was afraid of that while I was writing this book. I was like, okay, a book takes about a year to write. Will it be obsolete by the time it comes out? And I tried to make it a future-proof a little bit. And so far it's held up. Everything in the book, I think, is still very relevant. And it's more about a framework. It talks about some technologies now, but then it extrapolates, and it talks about a framework as even as that the AI gets better and better and better over the next 5 or 10 years. I've always been a big reader of science fiction, and I think there's no better time than now to be reading science fiction, not just for entertainment, but just make sure that we can think broadly about what it means to be a human being. What really is our society if you take it from a 30,000 foot view, or even from a 3 light year view. Um, History, I think, is another really important thing. We were talking earlier about major inflection points in humanity, the advent of fire, the wheel, agriculture, writing, the printing press. I mean, we could even go even earlier back, human language. These were all step changes for humanity. I think we are in one of those step changes, and it's going to happen faster maybe than any of the ones that came before it. And so I would say history, even evolutionary biology, and then think forward, science fiction. Some of my favorite books. I was just reading I was reading Ender's Game to my 9-year-old. Wonderful. It just reminded me of like when humanity faces an existential challenge, they need the kids to help fight it because they're able to think differently about very intractable problems. But then it becomes even more powerful when those kids are assisted by artificial intelligence to really up their game, which is what that book's about. 2001, the Space Side. A lot of people have watched the movie. I personally think the book is even better. And then going on to 2010. Once again, these are books that really challenge our role. What is intelligence? What's the role of humanity in the grand scheme of things? I'd say spirituality too. Um, I think it's important at times like this when to sometimes take a step back and have a framework for the universe. And I personally enjoy a lot of the Eastern traditions. eh, You know, uh, uh, Books like the Bhagavad Gita, the Upanishads, which are like these ancient Vedic scriptures. They're very modern in many ways. People in Silicon Valley like to debate, are we living in a simulation? Well, there were folks meditating in the forests of India who essentially said, yes, we are living in a simulation. And they were saying this about not, they didn't even have the word simulation in the same sense. I mean, we don't realize the word avatar is a Sanskrit word. It comes from, hey, this thing that I call my body, this is just my representation in this reality. And then the people in the video game industry said, oh, avatar is a good word for that, my representation in a simulation. So I think this isn't a bad time to do some of that.
Sal, send us off. What's next for you and also the Kahn Academy? What should we expect in terms of offerings? You've mentioned a couple of the services you offer that not everybody is familiar with. Talk about Kahn and what should we expect from you next?
Well, we are just continuing, as many folks who are using Khan Academy today, our mission, if we really want to do it and we're serious about it, free world-class education for anyone, anywhere, we need to be reaching billions. So we're expanding internationally. We have major efforts in Brazil and India and the Philippines and Vietnam, one starting up in Pakistan. I just had some good conversations this morning about Africa and how we can really reach as many students there. So we're expanding geographically, more languages, more subjects. I think artificial intelligence is actually going to help us there too, and really become part of part of just what goes on, the interstitial fluid of education, learning, assessment, credentialing, and hopefully we can remove, in partnership with many others, including the global education system, the frictions for someone to reach their potential. And if we do that, I think then we have a pretty good chance of navigating some of the dislocations of this inflection point.
How about for you personally? You've been a prolific writer, speaker, and advisor. What should we expect from you next?
Oh, well, these days, I just wrote Brave New Words. I'm heads down and just reimagining Khan Academy in this AI world. And I'm serious when I say reimagining. I think it needs to. And I think anyone who leads an organization who's not doing a little bit of reimagining in an AI world is going to find themselves in trouble in about 2 to 5 years, depending on what their organization is doing. But my interest is always on the different pieces of how do human beings become, including myself, how do we have purpose? How do we find happiness? So education's a big part of it. I'm going to be exploring credentialing. Even, we've started some schools, real schools, not under Khan Academy, but we have Khan World School, Khan Lab School, exploring ways for credit in higher education, maybe even ways to offer higher education degrees, placement into the workforce. But I'm also interested in any other the dimensions of ways that are really important for human connection. We have a loneliness epidemic, mental health. So I might be dabbling in some of that too.
Your new book, Brave New Words, How AI Will Revolutionize Education and Why That's a Good Thing. Sal Khan, founder of Kahn Academy. Thanks for rejoining us again today. Look forward to having you back again in the future.
Thanks for having me.
And we'll see you back here next week for a new conversation on leadership.